Actually, the thing I'm most upset about out of all of this is a lot of people are missing the point. I saw a lot of comments saying, this is why I use this operating system instead of Apple. And it's like, you're missing the whole point of this, actually. Like, you can use iCloud on most operating systems, and this would impact every operating system. You can use the most private, secure operating system in the world. And if you use any end-to-end encrypted cloud provider on that, this now concerns you. So I think people really need to see this for what it is. It's an attack on encryption. It's not an attack on an operating system. It's not an attack on anything.
So what you were saying at first about all those people who are like, oh, that's why I use Android. That's why I use this. It doesn't matter. This is an attack on encryption, like you said. Yeah, that attitude bugs me so much. Whether it's politics, whether it's encryption, whether it's whatever it is, like, don't have that attitude. We're all in this together, man. They're coming for you at some point.
No, fully agree. I think it's well put.
The irony here is these bozos missed the entire point of the argument from the beginning. If they had a fraction of the intelligence they portray themselves to have, they could see the argument being made. It's a cautionary lesson in why you shouldn't put all of your data into a single ecosystem. Apple is notorious for keeping people deeply rooted into their ecosystem, something which even these bozos have mentioned before.
That's part of the reason why I try my hardest, even if I'm using an Apple device, to not fall into the Apple ecosystem, because once you're in it, they make it extremely difficult to get away from it. But this is all at the cost of going further into the Apple ecosystem, which introduces a tough choice for users who may struggle to find that equally capable, if not better, encrypted alternative outside the Apple ecosystem. It's a really tough spot to be in right now. There's things that I like that Apple does and things I don't like, and the stuff they do to lock people into their ecosystem is complete BS on so many levels. And it makes everyone less safe. It gives everyone less control, less freedom to do what they want with their devices. It's just not right on a lot of different levels. So
there are so many good options out there. KeyPass is great, obviously, just to go ahead and say it. If you are already using one of those and you switch to this, I honestly think you're moving backwards. And maybe it's great. I'm not saying it's not going to be secure or it's not going to be a good product, but you're locking yourself into Apple's ecosystem and it's not source available and nobody can audit the code. That's actually one of my few criticisms with 1Password.
Which, for the record, is a fine password manager if you're okay being inside the Apple ecosystem, but it's an easy thing to not be locked in with, and there's better options in my opinion. But if you like Keychain, then sure. I don't see how this is competitive at all to the other password managers.
All of Apple's operating systems, devices, and services go hand in hand. Unless you're running macOS in a virtual machine or running a Hackintosh machine, you're pretty much guaranteed to be locked into Apple's ecosystem. That means relying on more services and rooting yourself even further to Apple. And now it makes the effort of migrating to better alternatives that much more difficult and time-consuming. Especially when the average person is too lazy, so they just remain where they're at. And because they're locked into the ecosystem, they're now slaves to the whim of whatever decisions Apple chooses to make. Yes, this is primarily an attack on encryption. But why can't this also demonstrate the dangers of being locked into a single platform? Aside from neglecting your duty to fact-check yourselves, it's very disappointing that you simply dismissed this argument completely, rather than taking the time to analyze any validity to it.
That's a separate issue.
No. I consider them linked.
Let's also not forget that Apple has iCloud backups turned on by default. Any users who weren't aware of this automatic opt-in are also caught up in this crap. Users who likely didn't even want to use iCloud in the first place. I'm willing to bet the bulk of Apple's users fall into this category. Why else would they feel the need to opt users in by default, instead of letting users naturally choose to use iCloud? So in essence, Apple is largely to blame for this current situation. All because they were greedy and arrogant.
Because you're a stupid, short-sighted little prat.
And yet, the bozos on Surveillance Report want us to defend Apple for its preventable mistake.
When you were saying oh, you need to find alternatives for these, I don't know anything on Android that does health. Well, health stays encrypted, but yeah, Siri shortcuts, bookmarks, reminders. Okay, we have Drive, Photos, Notes, arguably backups, wallet passes. Come on.
Did you even bother looking into alternative apps? Or is this yet another exaggerated statement because you were too lazy to even search for alternatives? Not to mention your statement is very vague. Are you talking about native apps or privacy-friendly alternatives? Not only are these features trivial, but all of them are natively offered on Android. Google and Samsung have apps that do all of those things and can be synced across your devices with an account. Proton also offers these features as well, which is quite odd that you didn't even consider mentioning. At best, you're being disingenuous with your arguments. At worst, you're flat out lying to your viewers.
And this is a dangerous thing that Apple does, which sets them up and puts a target on the back of their heads for government censorship. It's enabling government censorship all around the world because Apple refuses to open up the iOS ecosystem.
Oh, wait, you serious? Let me laugh even harder.
Now you're just being stupid and naive. You should know full well that Apple won't open up anything unless the government forces them to do so. That's the only reason Apple included USB-C ports on iPhones and opened up their ecosystem to alternative app stores.
On this note, Apple is now also going to allow rival app stores on iPhones and iPads, at least in the EU. This is also something they're being forced to do, thanks to the EU, who is now requiring them to allow sideloading in third-party app stores. This will roll out in iOS 17 of next year. Not really privacy related, but the EU also required Apple to move off of Lightning to USB-C.
Then there's the other issue you always keep tiptoeing around and seem to always downplay to your audience. Apple is going to do whatever it wants, regardless of what the consumers want. Or did you conveniently forget about Apple intentionally installing and enabling their AI stuff on user devices? And without their knowledge or permission either.
Apple auto-opts everyone into having their photos analyzed by AI for landmarks. The feature, known as Enhanced Visual Search, was called out last week by software developer Jeff Johnson, who expressed concern in 2 write-ups about Apple's failure to explain the technology, which is believed to have arrived with iOS 18.1 and macOS 15.1 on October 28, 2024. In a policy document dated November 18, 2024, which the article notes, if you check the Wayback Machine, it actually doesn't show up until later, so it's almost like they backdated this update or something. Next up, this one's just kind of a quick letting you guys know. So the latest Mac and iOS updates, 15.3 and 18.3 are out, and they have automatically enabled Apple Intelligence. So originally in 15.1, 15.2, and iOS 18.1 and .2, Apple Intelligence was opt-in, and users who wanted the feature would need to turn it on in the settings. Going forward, it will now be enabled by default, and you will have to go into the settings to turn it off.
If you two weren't so busy being self-righteous bullshitters, you would see that the operating system comments do have some validity. Then again, I'm not the one making tons of money by deluding my viewers. I'm also not the one giving people a false sense of security by telling them Apple is still trustworthy in terms of privacy and security. Perhaps you should address your own bias before dismissing someone else's argument entirely.